And Susan wanted me to write the stories of 1979. Super Sandra is the story today. You were yeah. Just told us, right? Yeah. And I've been waiting for that story ever since. So I was really worried. I said, what if I can't write? And anytime Susan's worried, what if she can't write? And about 3 weeks after I turned over the pages and I get a text from Susan that's, this is great. And I was like, thank heavens. So that's when I got brought into the writing group. And we decided we would come up with a name and we would self-publish our first anthology based on a theme. And the theme was kidnapped. That was our first book based on a theme. So we all had stories that had something to do with kidnapping. Then we did another one where it was stolen. So it was all about something stolen, right? And Susan had this world she developed. And so the story in the first book has like some of the same characters that went into the second book. Same characters, but very fun, funny, cute, mystery kinds of stories. So we all did something on the theme of stolen. And then we thought, let's have a shared universe. And since we all know San Diego, let's base it in San Diego. So we all know what we're talking about. And we all love the territory. And we wanted to bring magic to San Diego. So 4 of the 5 of us met in her game room, a big whiteboard, and we started coming up with ideas. And that's where the Brazil first came to life. And we put rules for the magic, because everybody has to follow the rules, right? That's the whole point of this shared universe stuff. And we started developing stories, and we put on one note big biographies of each of our characters. So you can borrow someone's character if you treat them respectfully and keep them in character, you know? So the characters, we arrange them in chronological order. And so the characters will pop up, you know, different characters will pop up throughout. And some of the stories are told from the human point of view, and some of them are told from the Grizel point of view. So the Grizel look like these guys. They're very tall. So this is Sandoz, and he is 7'2". When he looks like a human, he's 6'10". He can take his illusion, he can drop it down. He's always 7 foot. Like this guy is 6'9". So he's short for Grizel. He's a little on the short side. And as a human, he looks like he's about 6'5", which is fine, except most doors are 6'8". It's just an illusion that he looks like that. He still has to duck through every door, or his horns would connect on it, right? So they can look different, but they are bending microbes. That's how they get the illusion. They themselves haven't changed their bodies, right? So if you were to put your hand on an arm, you would feel the scales or the horns. It's always there. It just looks different. It's just an illusion. You know, they don't change themselves. They just change the way you visibly see them. There are a few humans where it doesn't work very well. You know, what a crazy human claiming there's aliens, you know. Nobody worries about it too much. They monitor stuff, you know, the internet, whatever, right? But they mostly just let it go. Oh, just in case you're wondering. So my husband posed for Jackson, and this is not on purpose, but look at his shirt. he was getting ready, and I went, "You're wearing the shirt that's on the cover." So I was just, you know, it's fun, you know, goofiness there that was wearing the same shirt. But he posed for it, because although I can do stripes on hand and stuff, I was not going to recreate a Hawaiian shirt. And Jackson always loves Hawaiian shirts and shorts. That's, you know, I was here 90% of the stars. It just, you know, made sense. Listen. Okay, so, you guys want to hear a story? Yeah, of course. You guys want to go get a munchie first? Yes, there's snacks. Go get snacks. Let's see, here it is. Yeah, and So this is not a story that's in the book. And the story came about because Santos, in one of my stories, he thinks about this incident a little bit, and he's a little worried about it. And her character, who takes place in this story that she's writing with, thinks a lot about it, and we want to be on the same page. We know that he curses Santos. We know things happen, but we're not sure exactly how. And so I wrote the story so we know what happened during this incident.
So you need to tell me how the world is going to
And now we'll do that because I'm going to right now. Yeah, and then I'll so, but yes. So this story actually takes place, and this is important to know, it's 19 years ago, which one was.
Thank you.
So Santos here is younger. He's like about 33 years old. He's only been a colonel in their army for a few months. The character in here, Dawe, is younger. He's about 27, 28 when the story takes place. And you're going to see him when he's older, but this is him when he's about 27, 28, and he's about 33. And he's just been a colonel for a few months. So, and it's 17 years before the book started. But it is where it's going to start getting rolling. I think, yeah, sure. It's, yeah. Shake it, was it? Okay, did you want to go back and get the cheese or anything before it started? Okay, so a little bit about the dog. Their country is called Algeria, and it starts at about 8,000 feet. And it goes up to about 16,000. And so they have big chests and they're very tall and it snows. Their world is cold. I mean, they get like 3 good months of summer and that's it. So it's kind of like, okay. Colonel Sandosin stood quietly on icy plaza flagstones, his breath steaming in the freezing night air. Again. How many more times do we have to do this? Why could these hot-headed young bucks just be out of trouble? But his newly taken responsibilities and executions were now part of his duty. He sighed in resignation and watched the frosty fumes trail from his mouth into the darkness. Sandosin wanted very much to return to the war front as soon as possible. Visits home now meant he must carry out death sentences, and they couldn't. The two Ruff importance joined in the plaza, humbled heavily against the winter cold. The water mage carried a torch, the flames snapping with the frigid night air. The other yawned and stretched backward, cracking his back before bringing out his key that would unlock the large iron doors, covering the loathsome crack in the plaza. They seemed completely inured to the process and to the risk itself. Then Logan wondered. He hated it. That flat, black, deadly nothing, which no one ever became. The rift was a dangerous enigma and a terror to the bit was that. The warden let a ball of light drift up from his fingertips before moving toward the lost, but Sandosin held up his hands. No, he instructed them. Let the doors remain closed until the sentence is read. The warden shrugged. He didn't care one way or the other. He just wanted to return to his warm bed. Before himself was laid, his bow slung across his shoulder, along with a quiver of heavy arrows. Like Sandosin, he was a darkness mage, his eyesight keen in the dark night. Sir, he greeted the colonel, nodding his head and walking up to stand beside Sandosin. He stamped his feet and rubbed his arms to warm him. Cold night, sir. Indeed, Captain. As if acknowledging the archer's statement, Sandosin wrapped one side of his fur-lined cloak about his shoulder, insulating himself further from the cold. Is this another rebel? It is. Do you think there is any truth to their complaints? The captain asked softly, unwilling from their conversation to be heard by the wardens on the opposite side of the rift. And my pages are stuck together. Okay. I don't know. I did not attend the trial. The judges deemed his actions treason, which is why we are here now. Sandosin frowned in the darkness. He didn't know if the accusations were true, but he did know his emperor. They had grown up together before he was the emperor. Sandoza knew him all too well, knew his excessive tastes, his insecurities, his obsessive quest for power. They had been friends once, but now it was partly because of these things that Sandoza had joined the military early to distance himself from the spoiled prince. Sandoza had his own questions, but he kept them to himself. They both turned their gazes up toward the gates of the palace prison at the top of the sloping courtyard. They did not have long to wait. Sandoza heard the gates clang as they swung open, and two military guards escorted their prisoner through. They carried long halberds, their fur-lined cloaks thrown back over their armed shoulders. The prisoner walking between them wore nothing but a pair of platinum manacles. Sandoza frowned to himself. Such a cold night, they could have at least thrown a blanket about the condemned's shoulders. His feet, no doubt, would be completely numb before he even got to the river. At least his misery would be short-lived. Sandoza was not one for inefficient spectacle. Even at this distance, Sandoza could hear the prisoner braving the guards, and as they drew closer, the condemned's fire towards their complacency was clear. The corner of Sandoza's mouth portrayed him with a smile, which he quickly concealed. But he couldn't help feel a small amount of admiration towards this rebel. He didn't think he could face his imminent death with such a combination of insolence and conviction. By the time they arrived at the rift, the prisoner was visibly shaking, but whether with anger, fear, or the freezing cold, Sandoza could not tell. As the guards halted the prisoner before him, he eyed the red fire mage closely and decided it might be all three. You, the young Zell spat out, apparently recognizing the colonel from his own service in the military. The condemned rose to his full height, which was almost half a cubit shorter than Sandoza stood tall. Even so, he stood in all of his naked dignity and radiated a sense of self-assurance and command that belied his short stature. Colonel Sandoza, you need to listen to me. I am speaking the truth. The emperor is corrupt. Everything I told the judges was true. You, above all others, should know there is truth in what I say. The prisoner stopped his rant to blow on his fingers to warm them, then swore under his breath when he remembered that the platinum manacles prevented his use of magic. In the brief ensuing quiet, Sandoza answered, I know of no such thing. If you could not convince the judges, why would you think I would believe you now? He shook his head as he pulled out the charges and unrolled the parchment. Valmont, son of Meriden and Baldy, you have pardoned treason against the throne and incited sedition among the populace. You have been judged and found guilty of these crimes and are to be delivered into the rift this night without delay. Sandoza looked directly into the young Grizel's unrepentant eyes. May the Almighty Judge have mercy on your soul. Colonel Sandoza nodded to the door wardens. Don't you wonder why my execution is taking place in the middle of the night? You are being willfully and woefully ignorant, the prisoner explained as the golden light mage took out the large key and inserted it into the lock, removing it and thrusting the hasp aside. Each warden then grabbed the large iron ring on each door and attempted to roll the doors back. But the weight of the doors had melted the ice beneath to freeze the iron wheels to the runners, and for a moment the doors refused to bulge. See, the young prisoner forced a barrel grin around his chattering teeth. Even the god of death agrees with me. But he got no further, for with a wave of the blue warden's hand, the ice cracked about the wheels with an audible snap. The rift was strained against the iron rings, and the door slowly rumbled apart, revealing a large fissure across the flagstones. Inside was nothing. Absolutely nothing. No light, no ripples, no reflections, and absence of everything. Even sound seemed to be sucked into the intense blackness. Valmont stared at it, his fear now plain across his face. But he only allowed himself a brief moment before he turned back to his executioner, his anger giving him strength. Your blind loyalty to that evil bastard is not honorable. He serves only himself, not the greater good of Algezor or its citizens. You know this, damn you. What about your vows to Algezor? You swore service to your country, Colonel Sandoza. I swore my allegiance to my country and my emperor, as well you know. Sandoza spoke loudly, projecting his voice above the beauty of the rift. My allegiance is not questioned here, and your treason has already been decided. So these are your choices, Sandoza continued, having gained the floor on the vow and looked as though he could barely contain himself. You will mount the stairs now and fall to your fate. If you do not, your guards," and he nodded to the armored gazelle standing to either side, "will not hesitate to use their halberds to convince you otherwise. Once you're on the stone slab, if you choose not to jump, my archer will shoot you. He will not miss. We are taught that the rift is a gift from the god of death. I do not know what that entails, nor the fate of the condemned and pass into it, but I do know how painful it is to be impaled by an archer's bolt. I suggest we not hesitate, for either way, you will enter the rift." "That's not a choice," Malvin snarled, and again tried to warm his hands, only to growl in disgust when he couldn't. "Sandokan, you must listen. The emperor is corrupt, and our citizens are dying from it. I have proof." "Then why did you show it to the judges?" Sandokan snapped before gesturing toward the final stair, unwilling to engage in further useless debate. The guards lowered their halberds, pointing them toward their prisoner. Valon glanced over his shoulder and began to slowly back toward the stone stairs. "It was hidden in my house. They burned my house." "Who burned your house?" "6 fire mages, obviously in the emperor's employ. They were waiting when I was pulled from my bed. I saw the flames as I was led away." "How do you know they were the emperor's? Were they wearing his livery?" "Of course they weren't wearing his livery. He's corrupt, not an idiot." "Well then, how inconvenient for you, having proof suddenly disappear." "I'm telling the truth, and you know it," the young gazelle shouted. "Find my house. You will see that no structures near it were harmed. It was destroyed by mages." Valon backed to the staircase, and Sandokan pointed up toward the slab cantilevered over the gaping black crack in the flagstones. One of the guards gave the prisoner a warning poke with the sharp end of his halberd, and Valon looked toward Sandokan, but the colonel folded his arms across his arm and chest and waited. The young gazelle growled in anger, then turned and mounted the stairs, carefully edging out toward the end of the slab. "Sandokan, stop being such a stubborn fool," he shouted down, his voice greatly muted by the rift. "The emperor is using you. If you continue to abet his corrupt and unjust ambitions, our deaths are on you, damn it. You need to listen to me." "To the contrary, I have listened to every word you have said," the colonel shouted back. "Maybe next time, if one of you really has proof, you should bring it to me before you are arrested for treason." "So you can make the arrest? We are not so stupid as that." Sandokan shrugged. "Then we are done here. Have you made your peace and said your last prayers?" "Prayers!" Sandokan shouted, his outrage apparent. And then he took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and tilted his face to the night sky, saying loudly, "Lord of Death, hear my prayer." Abruptly, his eyes flashed open and his gaze snapped toward Sandokan. "Please grant this same gift that you have bestowed upon me to Colonel Sandokan. Erase his name from any place of honor for all eternity, and grant his family the same sorrows and disgrace that mine will face." Valon's eyes narrowed and he glared down at Sandokan, spittle flying from his lips with the force of his words. Without thinking, the archer dropped to one knee and knocked an arrow into his bow. "Let him regret his loyalty for all time." Sandokan steeled himself against the ferocity of the young gazelle's wrath, meeting his fiery gaze and resisting the sudden urge to take a step backward. "I pray this to you," Valon continued, staring and blinking at Sandokan, "from the depths of my heart. God of death, hear my prayer." Valon took an immediate step back and dropped silently into the gaping black maw before the echoes of his final shouts dissipated. Sandokan stood without moving, staring up at the slab where only moments before a young gazelle, full of life and righteous anger, had taken his last breath, and cursed him. Cursed him to his God, with whom Sandokan had a strange and intimate relationship. He was only then aware of how fast his heart was beating. He should not take this personally. He knew that. But Valon had invoked the Lord of Death, Sandokan looked inferior. Sandokan suddenly wished he were alone. He needed to speak with his God and felt this with an almost overwhelming urgency. "Sir," the captain whispered, removing the arrow from his bow, "are you all right?" "Me?" Sandokan glanced down toward the captain. "Of course," he replied with more confidence than he felt. "A little dramatic flair makes things interesting." He dismissed the guards, then nodded to the wardens to roll the giant doors back. They closed with a sonorous boom that reverberated across the empty plaza. The archer turned to leave, but Sandokan said softly, "Stay a moment. A word before you go." The colonel waited until the doors were locked and he released the wardens. He watched them saunter across the plaza before he turned back toward the archer. "Colonel," the back-aged asked softly. "Captain, I want you to do me a favor. I would like to know where Valdon lived." See if you can find his house. Be subtle in your inquiries and speak of this to no one but me. Sanderson stared into his young captain's eyes, and his gaze was returned without wavering. Do we understand each other? We do, sir. There is no dishonor in discerning the truth. None, sir. You are dismissed, Captain. Thank you for your service tonight. Always an honor, sir. The archer left. The plaza lay in cold silence as snow began to fall. Sanderson stood alone beside the river, staring up toward the stone slab. Finally, he turned toward home where his mate waited for him, his head bowed. Lord of Death, he whispered, hear my prayer. When we were, as these stories go on, we had to really finalize what they thought their religion was all about. So they have a Trinity like we do. They have the Almighty Judge, who is kind of unknown in his power, but he has two twin children who look like Brazil if they show up. And one is the god of death, and the other is the goddess of life. And so in her realm are things like love, health, all sorts of things you would pray to her for. And the god of death has pretty much one real job, and that is to cross dying people over to the next life. And although we, from the human point of view, never get to see him, he does show up in one of the stories. At least you think so, because it sure seems like the dying Griselle sees him. So, but Sanderson has a very weird relationship with him. And I mean, he's in the army and he has seen a lot of people die. So, one of his people.
Yeah. Can we ask questions?
Yeah.
What's a cubit? How tall is a cubit?
A cubit is 18 inches.
Oh.
So it's from the Bible. I just wanted something old. So I took cubits from the Bible, and it's about 18 inches. So the rift is about 12 by 20 feet in size, this big giant hole. And they also, when they talk about distance, they use farsangs, which comes from about the same time period, and that's 4 miles. So I used those. When I started using cubits, I went, okay, now I got to come up with a unit of distance. So I did my research, and they were using farsangs in about that time period. So that's where I came up with those. Yeah.
It was so exciting to hear you read this, because I know the characters Sandazon and Valdon and where they end up. So it was really cool
to see. Well, that's why she's been reading A Promising Day, because then you really know where they end up. But
also, was there a word that you used for the weapon that the Griselle hold?
Halberd.
What is
Halberd is a polearm, and it's a name from this world. It's got like a blade on one side and a point on the top. It's like a big, tall, long, skinny axe. It can look really fancy. I've got a picture. Okay. It's in the front of the book.
Oh, cool.
So, which I should show you anyway, because this is the picture that goes with the next story.
Cool.
But
you're good writers.
It's only one. They're actually taller, but it wouldn't fit on the page. So I add another 3 feet to it, and you got it.
Oh,
that's a halberd. It's a fancy axe, and it's got like a pointy thing on the end.
Cool.
It's a medieval weapon.
Cool.
So that's what. Yeah. So this is Sanderson's execution. Things have changed in 5 years. No, 19 years. So 19 years have passed. I'm actually writing, I would say the sequel, but it's not. It's a prequel, and it takes place 5 years before this story. And it's basically, so Jackson and Sanderson know each other. You get that feeling, but they know each other well, and this is their story. When he was a lowly lieutenant. So that's Traitors of Algiers is what I'm working on now. And that really brings up the whole traitor thing and Sanderson's journey to where he lands in this one.
I'm curious about the Emperor in that situation.
The Emperor, well, you're going to find out a little bit more. We're going to see him briefly in this one. And yeah, we had the same tutors when they were young. So when they were 13, 14, they were best buds. But Sanderson was really good, like in his swordsmanship classes. And so he was taught early that during bouts with his future emperor, he should let him win now and then. Yeah, yeah, the sword master was very clear on, some protocol. Yeah, because you can be very good by yourself, but not when you're sparring with your future emperor. Okay, so 19 years has passed. Okay, and so the first chapter in the book is called The Rift. And if I lower my voice for Sandoz, it's because he sounds like James Earl Jones. With an accent on our world, not on his world, because he's speaking his own language. But on our world, he sounds like James Earl Jones with an accent. Just so you know. Okay.
We're gonna do some water.
Yeah,
I'll get you some water.
yeah, just water, but he lovely, actually. Man. He doesn't, if my throat gets too dry, I'll start coughing. Okay. I don't have to wait for Hannah because she's read this already.
That's just.
She knows the story. Okay, so this is the first chapter in the book. And it is a good introductory chapter. And it starts on and their role is spelled EERIA. Their country's Algebra, but their role, and it's not pronounced area and it's not pronounced area. It's kind of in between. I have trouble saying it right, but they don't.
It's not gonna be a new recorder.
See, that's an area. Okay. The former General Sandoz, supreme commander of his emperor's combined imperial armies, closed his eyes and tried to sleep. And tried not to sleep. It was a conundrum. His agony made him desperately desire sleep as respite from his misery, but knowing his execution would come at the dawn made him begrudge giving up a single moment to blissful unconsciousness. Yet he had no real choice. His pain prevented any hope of sleep, and so he endured the night. The pain always worsened at night. He ducked his head further beneath the fur-lined cloak so that his breath would help to keep him warm, as the night temperature in his dungeon cell dropped well below freezing, and cursed under his breath as his horns scraped against the hard stone bench. At least they left him this heavy, fleece-lined military cape, and he still wore his undertunic, made of warm homespun and long enough to reach halfway down his thighs. Without them, he would have expired from exposure well before the emperor could witness his execution. But even so, a violent chill shook him, making his teeth chatter. He clamped his jaws tightly shut and hoped his shaking would not be so tomorrow, and would walk before the officers of the combined imperial armies to his impending death. Oh, thank you.
I'm gonna put this back there and there's cheese and crackers.
Thank you. Okay, so let's see. He walked before him to his impending death, his imperial armies, his troops. He cringed at the thought of having to walk naked, manacled and shackled before those soldiers who had, only a fortnight before, revered him as their commander. Worse would be the more horrifying fate he dragged to his death. But he was determined to walk from the rift on his own 2 feet, no matter how terrible the pain. And the thought of the pain made a nervous knot in his empty belly. The soles of his feet were burned, in some places to the bone. Torture. 3 days they had tormented him with the oil of hot peppers and glowing tongues on the tender, scaleless soles of his feet. But he never gave them any information, not even to admit there was a kernel of truth to their accusations. He had denied it all, and the plans of his coup were still in place, although he would not live to see the fruition of his careful labors. He found grave satisfaction in the thought of an end to the emperor's reign. Another violent chill shook him. It was not just the cold, although he knew it was freezing. He burned with fever, the result of crossing through the filth and excrement from the hundreds of prisoners who had come before him in order to lick the moisture from the walls, his only source of refreshment. At least the frozen temperature meant he no longer heard the tormenting drip drip of water trickling down the opposite side of his cell. He could smell the raging infection in his feet, and it almost made him gag, with his nose buried under his cloak. He knew he would not last more than another few days, so perhaps his execution was a blessing. Maybe. The rift terrified him. He closed his eyes and prayed again to the God of death to be merciful and grant him swift passage to the almighty all-knowing judge. Not until recently had he been afraid of judgment, for he had strived always to live honestly and nobly. He had commanded his troops with fairness, treated prisoners with equanimity, his wife with love and respect, and his children with kindness and laughter. Only when he realized the full corruption of his emperor did he have any regrets. And now he had many, including all those political prisoners he had commanded into the rift silently in the middle of the night at the behest of his emperor. The rift. Of that he was mortally afraid, although he refused to show it. Sandokan didn't even to look at it once the iron doors were rolled back, exposing the massive crack in the palace plaza. 8 cubits wide, 15 in length, was the darkest thing existing in all of area. He acknowledged a strange irony in his fear, as he was a friend of darkness, a master of shadow. His mouth curled up a little in a rueful smile with thought, but even so, he feared the rift. Nothing came out of it, not even light. No reflections, no surface ripples. Even sound seemed to disappear into it, leaving the surrounding area in an unearthly silence. Screams did not escape, and anything, even a fingertip or the corner of a cloak, could pull one into it. He remembered vividly the night when one of his soldiers, new to the midnight executions, allowed his curiosity to get the better of himself, even though he had been forewarned. The general turned in time to witness the guard reach down and touch the darkness. Sandokan didn't even have time to shout, "No!" As soon as the soldier's finger touched the flat-back surface, his hand was jerked into the rift, followed swiftly by the rest of them. In an instant, he was gone. Their prisoner fainted dead away at the sight, and Sandokan had ordered him to be thrown in before he regained consciousness. It was the most merciful death he could offer. Religion taught that the rift was a gift from the god of death, but tenebrous legends hinted that the rift was the result of a spell gone terribly wrong, a spell wrought by a darkness mage like himself. How long before the emperors decided to use it as a form of execution was unclear, but this emperor, Sandokan's emperor, used it all too frequently. A catnip bit him in the groin, and he reached under his tunic to scratch at it, hissing as the cold irritation of his platinum manacle slid over his thigh. What he would have given for a warm bath at that moment. Sandokan grimaced at the thought that he'd be going to his grave covered in filth and crawling with gatnets, those disgusting little bloodsuckers. God! He prided himself on his physical appearance and his strength. He would not require his soldiers to do anything he himself could not do, and so he could march for days on end, hold the strongest bow with accuracy, and hold his heavy battle sword out at arm's length for minutes without the slightest tremble. And his physique showed it. Or did. He was days without food, and between his fever and constant dehydration, he probably looked as bad as he felt. Well, his appearance mattered now only to his foolish pride. He eased the chains of his manacles back over the edge of the stone bench, trying to keep as much of the platinum as far from his skin as possible. Platinum was the bane of Brazil, but there was nothing more effective at curbing magic of all kinds, and so was a necessary evil for prison containment. But it slowly corroded the skin, weakened muscles, and if exposed long enough, would lead to death. The smiths that worked the metal were paid handsomely, for their lives were shortened by exposure. Even now, his iridescent black scales were ashen gray and ulcerated beneath the shackles, and his forearms and lower legs had dulled to charcoal gray. He was fading, the creeping death of platinum exposure. The rift would be quicker. Maybe it really was a blessing from the god of death. He hoped so. Oh, he fervently hoped so. He prayed for that, had been praying to death about the rift for years. Only now his prayers were for himself, not the hapless victims of the emperor's ire. So many lives he had watched silently disappear into that flat black nothing. What would it feel like? An instant end? Would his soul be able to escape from that emptiness from which nothing ever escaped? Or would he feel his flesh slowly pulling apart in unendurable agony? Oh, please, he prayed silently. Not him. To ease his runaway fear of his imminent doom, he comforted himself with thoughts of his wife. When he had decided that the emperor was not fit to rule, he had sent her and his 2 children to safety with a distant relative in the far countryside. His letters went by a long and circuitous route, and hers returned in a similar fashion. Proof that Tamira was saved he already had, for if the emperor's minions had found her, she would have been tortured before him, and that may have broken him. They hadn't found her, and he knew eventually word of his execution would reach her. After she mourned, she would take another husband, and he found satisfaction in that. His wife was a